Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues of the day that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is author and journalist Ross Clark, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. The grotesque spectacle of Prince Andrew appearing in an American court to face down accuser Virginia Giuffre over allegations of sexual abuse may have been averted. But is the 12 million quid payout enough to end the whole tawdry affair? Now you see them, now you don't. As Putin keeps the West on tenterhooks with troop hokey-cokey on the borders of Ukraine, alleged cyber attacks against the country last night have chilling echoes of Russian hostilities before they seized Crimea. NATO warns the West should not be complacent. And as migrant boats continue to cross the Channel, are plans to process new arrivals on remote islands in the South Atlantic even plausible? Something needs to be done, but can this latest proposal work? That's what we're talking about for the next hour, but what do you need to talk about? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 2 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, Russia's envoy to the EU says he doesn't expect any escalation in the Ukrainian crisis in the coming weeks, while President Putin says he's open to continuing dialogue. Now, that follows claims by Russia that they're withdrawing troops from the border. But Defence Secretary Ben Wallace warns there's no evidence of military de-escalation and says 60% of Russia's land combat power is currently stationed at Ukraine's border. At NATO's defence ministers' meeting in Brussels today, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said President Putin's desire for continued dialogue supports the case for cautious optimism.
We have not so far seen any sign of de-escalation on the ground. NATO is not a threat to Russia, and we remain ready to engage in dialogue and find a diplomatic way forward. But while we continue to work for the best, we must also be prepared for the worst.
The Prince of Wales's charity foundation is being investigated by the Met Police over allegations of cash for honours. In a statement, the Met said the investigation relates to media reports claiming offers of help were made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Police officers have been liaising with the Prince of Wales charity, the Prince's foundation, as part of their initial investigations. Prince Charles's team have stated publicly that he was not aware of any links between donations to the foundation and honours. Prince Andrew is facing renewed calls to give up one of his last remaining major titles, Duke of York, after agreeing to settle the civil sex assault claim outside of court brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. The royal's already been stripped of his honorary military roles and the title of His Royal Highness. Prince Andrew says he regrets his association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and has agreed to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity. Well, legal partner Alan Collins says that's actually a good outcome for both parties.
I think it sends a very clear message, particularly to victims and survivors who have possibly not come forward. But actually, if you do come forward and you do disclose the fact that you've been abused as a child, you will be taken seriously. It doesn't matter where you come from in society, you will be listened to.
Higher prices in clothing and rising costs of some household goods have caused a further rise in the cost of living. Inflation's risen by 5.5% in the 12 months to January of this year. That's a near 30-year high. Now, meanwhile, across the UK, house prices have increased by more than 10% in the year to December. Official figures show the average UK house price rose to £275,000. Freddie Poser from Priced Out told GB News there aren't enough properties across the country.
Unfortunately, house prices have been continuing to skyrocket for years now, and the government isn't doing nearly enough to sort that out. So it means that more young people are going to be priced out of the market will remain completely inefficient, and it won't work for the average Briton.
Children between the ages of 5 and 11 in Scotland are to be offered a COVID vaccination, Nicola Sturgeon's announced. Yesterday, Wales became the first country in the United Kingdom to announce it would be vaccinating children in the same age group. The Met Office is warning 90-mile-per-hour winds brought by Storm Dudley could pose a danger to life. Amber weather warnings are in place across central and southern Scotland and the north of England. ScotRail has announced some of its services will stop at 4 p.m. for safety today. Swindon Town Football Club is trying to find a 6.5-year-old boy called Joe. He says he can't attend matches because his mum has no money for food. Now, Joe wrote the club a letter and sent the star player, Harry McCurdy, 26p in the post. The club tweeted his note. They're trying to get in touch with Joe, and now a crowdfunding page has been set up to try to raise money for him to go to a game. You're up to date here on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Now, if you're going to cough up 12 million quid to make something go away, well, you'd really hope that it would go away. But the out-of-court settlement between Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre, the victim of convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who accused the Queen's second son of sleeping with her for cash, allegations he, of course, denies, is likely to stick around like a bad smell for, well, pretty much forever. And while the controlled explosion of getting the whole sordid affair dealt with before the Queen's Jubilee celebrations kick off with the pomp and circumstance they warrant, the circumstances of the alleged romps could yet still be published in a tell-all book. With grandson Harry set to court even more attention with his own look-at-me stocking filler, one wonders when the Queen will ever catch a break from her troublesome princes. Well, let's talk to former royal editor at The Sun, Charles Ray. Charles, why do you think that it's being purported that the Queen has helped Prince Andrew out?
Because I think she has to help Andrew out. We don't know how much Andrew has got in his bank account. He's just sold this, or it's going through this Swiss chalet in Verbier for a reported 17 million, 6.5 million of which has got to go back for the mortgage, which leaves about 10 million. These are rough figures. Now, if the settlement is 12 million, and that's not, I don't think that's counting the legal costs. And one of his lawyers in America was costing $2,000 an hour. So there's a whole load of other money as well that's got to be paid out, and his mother is going to have to help, settle it.
Hugely expensive for the royal family. There are some newspapers today suggesting that perhaps this could essentially amount to taxpayers' money. How accurate do you think that is, or is that a slander, essentially?
I think that's totally wrong. I think that any money the Queen will give towards the settlement will come from her own private funds, none of which is paid for by the likes of you and me and your viewers. None of the sovereign grant, as I understand it, will be touched. So the Queen will be forking it out from her own private funds, as will Andrew.
I mean, a lot of people out there think that the way Prince Andrew has handled this from the offset has been rather catastrophic and pretty much in bad taste. Why do you think this sudden U-turn? Before he was saying, no, I want to go to court, I want a jury there, I want to hold her to account. He, of course, has always denied the allegations. What do you think has prompted this sudden U-turn and out-of-court settlement, particularly as it doesn't even seem to prevent Giuffre from going on to talk about what allegedly happened?
As I understand it, Virginia Giuffre may well talk about it, but not until after the Jubilee celebrations in June and July. Now, we'll have to wait and see if, in actual fact, I would be very surprised if she can talk about it. I can't believe that there will not be some sort of gagging order for both sides. But anyway, that's by the by. I think that this is quite a staggering turnaround by Prince Andrew. He was facing the prospect within about 3 or 4 weeks of actually having a face-to-face showdown with her lawyer David Bois, who is known as a top-level attorney in the States, quite a shark, and he would have been putting Andrew through his paces and asking all sorts of questions in a deposition, and it was going to take 2 days. It was going to happen on the 10th of March, and then you would have had the court case sometime in September and October, and that court case would be in the hands of 12 men and women who would have no respect, if you like, for the fact that he's linked to the royal family, and neither should they have had any respect for that. So I think he suddenly looked at it and thought, well, I can take my chances in court and I could end up losing, given what's been happening in the background, given the fact that he's tried umpteen times to get this court case shelved and the judge has refused each time, and given what's been said, he's described her as a money-grabbing sex kitten. It is quite a turnaround. I'm not surprised that there has been a settlement, as 97% of these cases, these civil cases, are settled before they go to court in the US.
And, I mean, a lot of people are perplexed by the accompanying statement as well that went with that settlement. Yeah. I mean, there's been no profession of innocence in that statement. Is that indicative that perhaps the Prince was prepared to gamble that she wouldn't win the case, and he suddenly realised that that doesn't look like that would happen?
Well, that is one interpretation, Alex, and I don't argue with you on that. But there's no profession of guilt either in there. What has changed? If you remember the Emily Maitlis interview, where he said he did not criticise his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, had no recollection of ever meeting this woman. All these sort of things. Now he has deep regrets in his association with Jeffrey Epstein. He's described Virginia Giuffre as very brave and accepts that she was a victim of sex abuse, and is suggesting he's now going to demonstrate his regret for these associations by helping to fight against sex trafficking and supporting its victims. I look forward to seeing how that's going to work.
Yeah, likewise. Charles Ray, thank you so much for coming on the programme, former royal editor of The Sun. Well, joining me next on the show is criminal lawyer Nick Freeman. Nick, what is the purpose of a settlement in this case if it doesn't come with an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement?
Well, we haven't seen the entire agreement. We've seen parts of it. I would have thought that there would be an NDA. What I understand at the moment is she certainly can't talk about it. Mrs. Giuffre can't talk about this until after the conclusion of the celebrations, and I would have thought that Prince Andrew's lawyers must have insisted that there will be limited disclosure. Otherwise, without it, she could literally spend the rest of her life going round giving talks about how she had sex on 3 occasions with Prince Andrew, which to a large extent would defeat the whole object and purpose behind the settlement. He'd be paying his money, she wouldn't be gagged, and it will be dealt with on the basis that this happened. The purpose of the settlement really is to, each party has gained something from it. She's gained obviously a substantial amount of money. She's gained recognition that she was trafficked and that she was abused. He's managed to put the thing to bed without any admission of guilt and without an apology. So at the moment, they've both got something that they can take away. And it's important, I think, to bear in mind that the proceedings in 30 days will be withdrawn. So in effect, he has won the case. There is going to be no finding by a jury against him, which is obviously hugely significant. But I haven't seen the minutiae of the agreement. It would have been very carefully crafted. And I would have thought she must be very limited as to what she says. She might be able to talk about it, but under very limited circumstances. But I can only speculate because I haven't seen the agreement. And all we're told at the moment is she can't talk until the conclusion of the celebrations.
But has Prince Andrew really managed to put this to bed? Because there'll be a lot of people out there thinking he was prepared to go to court. He's now coughed up 12 million, which is a huge amount of money. And for a lot of people, they will read that potentially as a confession of guilt.
Yeah, I think literally all your viewers will be thinking, you know, if I haven't done something, I'm absolutely not involved in this. Number one, I'm going to clear my name. I want to establish my innocence. And number two, I'm not going to part with a huge amount of money for something that I'm completely innocent of. That's one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is that this is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And she and no other senior members of the royal family would want these celebrations, which are completely unique, being overshadowed by such a tawdry and an embarrassing affair. So he would be under huge pressure to get rid of it. And I'm surprised that a settlement wasn't reached much sooner. You know, in my view, as soon as she got the green light for civil proceedings, as soon as she started this, I'm surprised that Prince Andrew's lawyers didn't reach an agreement, discuss this matter with her lawyers and say, look, what do we need to pay? How can we sort this out? Let's thrash out the terms of the agreement, because it's dragged on so long. And, you know, there's already been huge damage done. And, you know, I think the vast majority of people will assume that there's something in this. Otherwise, why would he fork out? So, as you rightly say, he's paying a lot of money. He's avoiding having to go to court. He's avoiding the potential for a conviction, which is hugely important for him. We're not saying that he has done it or he hasn't done it. We just don't know. We don't know what all the evidence is. But he's avoiding a conviction by a jury, which would be truly horrendous for him and the royal family. And I think that's the main advantage of doing this settlement. It's avoiding that. It's paying money. She, on the other hand, hasn't got a conviction. In 30 days, this will be put to bed. The proceedings will be withdrawn. So there is no conviction, no finding on the balance of probabilities that he had sex with her on 3 occasions. So that's really the benefit to him. And one can see that is of huge benefit to him. But of course, there's going to be a very strong smell attached to that payment. And I don't think that stench is ever going to go away. And I think Prince Andrew will not ever return to public life as a consequence of that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. Nick Freeman, criminal lawyer, thank you so much for coming on and explaining all the legal details of that settlement. Joining me in the studio today is journalist and author Ross Clark. Thank you for coming in today. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, Prince Andrew kind of messed up his handling of this from the get-go, didn't he?
Well, he did, and I suspect today, yesterday's decision was very heavily influenced by Buckingham Palace, putting pressure on him and his lawyers in order to preserve this very important Jubilee year. But from his point of view, it's a very bad outcome, really, because it leaves him in this no man's land between guilt and exoneration. And, you know, that will carry through with him. And as Nick Freeman said, I mean, it is curtains for his life as a working royal. He's now a retired royal, which is, you know, in many European families, royal families, that's a perfectly normal situation. But in the British royal family, we're not so used to that idea, royals retiring. You know, they sort of go on like the Queen Mother did and Prince Philip did till he was 97 at least. And, you know, the idea of Prince Andrew kicking his heels at the age of 62 is maybe a little uncomfortable for him. But,
I mean, do you think this also reflects badly on Virginia Giuffre? Because it wasn't long ago that she was saying she wouldn't accept an out-of-court settlement, and then now she has. 12 million is a huge amount of money. It doesn't necessarily negate some of the criticisms that she's been doing this for the purpose of earning quite a big wad of dosh.
Well, I mean, the thing is, what do we know about her? You know, what I would think of her, what you would think of her, really comes down to what actually happened. And if she's telling the truth, then, you know, she's a perfectly reasonable person, and her actions are perfectly reasonable. I mean, if she weren't telling the truth, well, that would be a different matter. But you know, I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it, for us who didn't go to Jeffrey Epstein's parties, really, to have an opinion of what went on there.
Difficult for us, and very difficult for the Queen as well, because this is the latest in a series of, behaviours from her sons, her grandsons, which have, potentially caused a lot of upset for the Queen in her Jubilee year.
Well, it's been absolutely horrible for her the past year. She'd lost her husband, and a few weeks before that we had the Harry and Meghan interview. We had Prince Andrew rumbling on in the background, and somehow the Queen sort of comes through it without a sort of hair out of place. You have to admire her strengths and character to be able to do that.
Yeah, what a stoic lady she is. God save the Queen, I say. Ross, thank you ever so much. Well, that's what my guests think, but I want to know what your views are. Do these crises affect the way that you perceive the royal family? Can the Queen do no wrong, or has this made you look upon the monarchy with slightly different perspective? Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or, of course, you can tweet us at gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Right after the break, we're going to be talking about the latest with the Ukraine crisis. But first, it's time for a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. 2 named storms in the next 48 hours are likely to bring disruption to many and dangerous wind speeds to some. Storm Dudley later today and then Storm Eunice on Friday. The rain ahead of Dudley already pushing in across much of the UK. Bands of heavy and persistent rain pushing eastwards across northern and western England, Wales, and for a time Scotland and Northern Ireland. That falling as hill snow for the north of Scotland, but with southwesterly winds picking up strength elsewhere, it's actually a very mild day for the vast majority, 15, 16 Celsius possible in the south. Then the spells of rain move through, but the wind really picks up through the evening. 70 and in some places 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The worst hit areas, Central Belt, southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland and northern England. Risk of disruption from those wind speeds and risk of some damaging wind speeds in some places. It's windy everywhere through the night, and there'll be blustery showers, longer spells of rain and hill snow for northern Scotland. And it's going to be cold in the north, but milder further south as we start off the day tomorrow. A bright start, and although it's a windy day again tomorrow, the winds will be coming down following the overnight strengths. And for many, it's a day of sunny spells and blustery showers. Again, hill snow for Scotland. Showers hit and miss elsewhere, with some brighter interludes in between. 11 Celsius in the south for the likes of Southampton and Plymouth. I think 5 to 8 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Into Thursday evening then, clear at first. The winds drop away at first, but the next spell of rain starts to move into southwest England, south and west Wales by the evening. And this is Storm Eunice very quickly rushing across the UK, and it's during Friday morning that it's likely to bring damaging and even dangerous wind speeds of 80 to 90 mile per hour for West Wales, South Wales, Bristol Channel coast and southwest coast. And on the northern flank of that low, the likelihood of disruptive snowfall for parts of northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. When it comes to the theatre of war, all eyes are on Putin's pantomime. Now you see them, now you don't. They're behind you. A slew of cyber attacks against Ukraine last night amidst troop hokey-cokey on the borders that show that the Russian leader is not letting the spotlight off him for 1 second as he plots his next act. In fact, it would appear he is lying in wait while prodding at the West in order to gift himself justification to invade. From claims of genocide in the Donbass, which American intelligence alleges he was set to illustrate through a series of fake staged graphic videos, to poking European leaders into threats of retaliation that then he could frame as acts of aggression, Putinism, the term given to the Russian president's predilection for misinformation and stage play, continues to keep the world on tenterhooks, waiting for the denouement of the drama. Well, let's talk now to former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Philip, first of all, what do you think about the current situation between Ukraine and Russia? There seems to be a lot of information coming from Russia. We've pulled back troops. No, we haven't. Conflicting messages. What do you think is really going on?
Putin's playing us. He's playing the West. You know, he has been playing this information game. He started it 10 years before he invaded Crimea and took over Crimea. So this has been going on for decades. And he's got the West exactly where he wants them at the moment, in a position where only he knows if he's going to go into Ukraine and if that's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And he's playing world leaders in a way that they're now queuing up to go and see him and try and negotiate with him. He feels at the center of the world stage and he's loving it. You know, he's the puppet master and he's treating the rest of the world as his puppets.
Now, there have been reports of cyber attacks against Ukraine overnight. What do you make of those?
Well, it's interesting. The cyber attacks against the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, against Ukrainian banks, they're similar to cyber attacks that happened just before the 2014 annexation of Crimea. And again, before that, there were similar troop movements in certain areas. However, I'd have expected if this was a precursor to him invading, he'd have gone for critical national infrastructure and a number of other places. So it's part of the messaging again. It's all about effects. It's creating an effect to create a debate so he can sit and watch what's going on. And he's using then the reaction that he sees from Western leaders in the international press and all the rest of it to try and see what his next move's going to be. He's playing a game of 4D chess. The trouble is, I think we're playing a game of 2D chess back against him, and we're not seeing all these maneuvers.
Yeah, I mean, he's claimed again in that press conference with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz yesterday that there are human rights offences carrying on in the Donbass. In fact, he used the word genocide. Is this something that he is trying to play out to basically give himself justification to invade at some point, or could those claims actually be true?
The claims aren't true. You know, NATO has looked at it very closely and would have been reporting it and would have been holding individuals to account. He loves it because it's the excuse that NATO used whenever it was dealing with the huge refugee crisis and the potential for genocide that there was in Kosovo. And both Putin and his defense minister, Lavrov, have used the Kosovo example on a number of occasions, and they would like to use that to justify them going in for humanitarian reasons to protect part of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. That would give them a very good excuse to come in, especially if they were just going for a limited incursion rather than an invasion of the whole country. But a number of those things have been intercepted, and you mentioned the videos. Those have probably been taken down before they could even be properly put out there by Western cyber capability. And there's a number of other things that have been exposed by US and UK intelligence services over the last couple of weeks where false flag actions by the Russians were being planned. This is all part of what Putin does. They've got a doctrine called Maskirovka, masking, which is all about deception. And deception is the critical part of warfare. It has been ever since Sun Tzu identified it as such in the 6th century.
I mean, is the West handling this the right way then? If Putin's end goal is to create a sort of stage play of disinformation, of lies, of, counter reports of various things, is the fact that we're sort of dancing to his tune the right way to go about things, or should we just ignore him?
Well, you can't ignore him because the threat's very real. He has got the capability to cross the border and invade Ukraine within the next couple of hours without any problems whatsoever. And therefore you have to engage, but it's then a very careful balancing act as to how much you engage, how much you then embolden him by doing that, what you can give away and what you can't give away. He's already won some good victories. He's effectively split elements of the EU by getting the German support and the Germans not making clear statements about the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and not selling weapons or delivering weapons to Ukraine. He's split any hope of there ever being an EU army, a European army in the future, because the Germans will never be trusted by anyone else again. And he's just playing this slowly. He's setting the timeframes. He's got all the tools out of there. We must engage because otherwise he'd just see that as weakness, would walk all over us.
Philip Ingram, MB, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on the show with your fascinating insights. A former senior military intelligence officer, who better to speak to about Putin's pantomime. Now, Ross, what's your take on this whole situation? It's been dragging on for months. There's almost a sense now that you either wanted to take his troops back or do something.
Yeah, well, I thought at the beginning of the year, I think I was of the view he probably was going to invade. I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, I sort of started to wonder. And, as Philip Ingram said, he's playing games with us. He wants sort of various things. I think what I would add to that is to say that, I think he's trying to put the West in a kind of Stockholm syndrome where he threatens to invade Ukraine, but then when he doesn't, we're also pathetically grateful to him that, we then cede to other demands like withdrawing Ukraine's NATO application and maybe allowing him to sort of annex some of the eastern areas of Ukraine, the Russian-speaking areas. And, that's the game he's playing. But, who knows what's going on inside his mind. But that's what I would guess.
In your opinion, whose approach has been right on this? You've got Germany, who, of course, are very economically bound to Russia with the energy supply, with the Nord Stream 2 proposed gas pipeline. You've got France, who seems to be offering huge conciliatory measures to Putin. Then you've got the tough-talking transatlantic partnership of America and Britain. Who's got the right approach?
Well, to start, who's got exactly the worst approach is Germany. I mean, at the beginning of this year, it was quite obvious that, the fallout from possible Ukraine war would be that Putin would cut off the gas supply to reply to Western sanctions. What did Germany do? It went ahead and closed down 3 of its nuclear power stations, making it more dependent on Putin's gas at a time when global gas prices are soaring. What did Germany then do? It sort of sent 5,000 helmets. It's a rather pathetic offering to Ukraine. Well, I think Britain's approach has been rather better. We have at least tried to offer Ukraine some kind of, armed backup. Ukraine is actually a more significant military power than you probably think. I think it's looked up the other day, got 22nd biggest army in the world. So it's got could mount quite a big response, and that's maybe why Putin's a little bit shy to go in.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of where things are going to go from here, it's anyone's guess, isn't it, what's going to happen next?
Well, it is. I mean, you can sort of see, look at markets. I mean, look at the stock markets. They're quite a good guide to what people in general think about what's going to happen. And, on Monday, they crashed because it looked as if Putin was going to invade. Yesterday, so I've withdrawn my troops. Well, no evidence he actually has, but then markets rebounded. And, clearly there's quite a lot of confusion among international investors what's going to happen and what are going to be the consequences of this. It's a very unstable situation.
Yeah, and will continue to be so for quite some time, I'd imagine. Ross, thank you ever so much. You are, of course, with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, Policy Exchange, a big think tank in Westminster, are urging the government to deport Channel migrants to the Ascension Island. Well, we'll be discussing that next. Can it work? First, let's go to the news headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright here to keep you up to date on GB News. Russia's envoy to the EU says he doesn't expect any escalation in the Ukrainian crisis in the coming weeks. Now, that follows claims by Russia that they're withdrawing troops from the border. Well, at NATO's defence ministers' meeting in Brussels, the Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, said that while there was no evidence of this, President Putin's desire for continued dialogue did support the case for cautious optimism. Prince Andrew is facing renewed calls to give up one of his last remaining major titles, Duke of York, after agreeing to settle the civil sex assault claim brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. The royal's already been stripped of his honorary military roles and his title of His Royal Highness. Well, Prince Andrew says he regrets his association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and has agreed to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity. The Met Police has launched an investigation into allegations of cash for honours. In a statement, they said it relates to media reports claiming offers of help were made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Police officers have been liaising with the Prince of Wales charity, the Prince's Foundation, as part of their initial investigations. No arrests have been made. The cost of living has increased further, with inflation rising by 5.5% in the 12 months to January of this year. That reaches a near 30-year high. Higher prices in clothing, rising costs of some household goods and increases in rents were key factors behind the increase. Children between the ages of 5 and 11 in Scotland are going to be offered a COVID vaccination. That follows Wales, who made the same announcement yesterday. Ministers in both countries say they've seen guidance from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, who suggested the change. You are now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's the one policy successive governments have dismally failed to get right, and the one that polling shows matters the most to the public. The ongoing farce of illegal immigration as hundreds more migrants cram into dinghies every week can seemingly not be resolved. From headline-grabbing hollow sound bites, from suggesting boats would be turned back, they can't, to the French pulling a finger out to help, they won't, to the Royal Navy being deployed to use warships to push back the flimsy vessels, something the Navy shudders at for the sheer horror of the optics. It would seem the government are running out of options. Well, today, a top Conservative think tank policy exchange, known to be a favourite of the government, has proposed that all new arrivals be deported and processed at remote centres within 48 hours of landing. Yeah, sounds like a good plan. But how viable is it to send migrants all the way to tiny islands 1,000 miles apart in the South Atlantic? A harebrained plan? Or a scheme that has seemingly worked in Australia, despite fierce opposition from rights groups? Well, joining me now on the show is Refugee and Asylum Rights Director, Amnesty International UK, Steve Valdez-Symonds. Steve, what do you think about this idea of moving migrants to islands as remote as Ascension?
I think it's probably one for the birds. I hope that proves to be the case. It's certainly a very reckless proposal, liable to be hugely expensive, both in terms of the financial cost of it, but also the human costs too, and indeed the costs of credibility of this country around the world if it were to embark on such a policy. I also note that it's almost 20 years ago that the then Labour government had much the same policy ideas, legislated to introduce them, never did so because one assumes that they realised what a disaster such a policy would be and therefore concluded that they would not go ahead. It really is about time that everyone dropped these rather harebrained schemes and concentrated on making our asylum system more efficient and effective in dealing with the relatively small number of people who seek safety here.
I mean, is there not an argument, though, that these people are making a perilous crossing across the Channel? There's no guarantee that they will be granted asylum, and we need to find some sort of way to stop them getting in the boats in the first place. How on earth can we do that without the cooperation of France and the EU, who seem to be sitting on their hands because, frankly, it seems to me they would rather the migrants move on from their own countries? I mean, the government is surely running out of options now.
Well, I think we should be a bit more respectful to the countries in Europe whom you mention, who host much larger numbers of people seeking asylum and indeed granted asylum than this country has seen in a very, very long time. So it's wrong to suggest that in some way those countries are washing their hands. It's really this country that is washing its hands of sharing some responsibility with its nearest neighbours, particularly by providing some entry, some safe entry, for the relatively few people in particularly northern France who have family and other connections in this country, which is why they want to seek asylum here rather than there, or indeed for some small proportion of the few people who struggle to get safely into the French system. If we were to do that, then yes, people wouldn't need to turn to smugglers. Sad to say, we keep refusing to share in any sense of this responsibility, and smugglers continue to thrive. And yet, the people who do make this crossing, particularly over the last 2 years, have been shown in significantly increasing numbers, and a majority by far, to be refugees when their claims are finally decided.
Steve Valdez-Symonds, thank you so much for coming on. That's Refugee and Asylum Rights Director for Amnesty International. Well, Ross, let's come to you on this. I mean, this is, when it comes to polling, this is something that voters are very concerned about. Steve Valdez-Symonds there saying we're not doing enough, we're not doing our fair share. And the way to stop this dreadful trade in humans is to actually open ourselves up a little bit more. But the government's hands are tied on this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would disagree there that we're not doing as much as other European countries. I mean, if you look at, for example, at efforts in Syria during the Syrian war, Britain was taking quite a large number of refugees. We were supporting and putting a lot of money into refugee camps in Syria. And that's really where the refugee problem should be tackled, as closest to source as possible. Because by the time you get to the cross-channel, what's going on between Calais and Dover, that's a sideshow. That is a small, relatively small number, well, quite a large number, but relatively small number in terms of the entire refugee numbers. mostly made up of young men, and the pictures you were showing there just showed it all. You know, there's crowds of young men, and you know that's not a sort of profile of refugees, of women, children, families. But all we get between Calais and Dover and is young men, and you know why is that? Because you know they're the ones who you know are able to undertake these longer journeys, and you know among them are a lot of economic migrants. Let's be frank, but you know what we should be focusing on is with refugee problems is tackling as close as we can to source. I think the Ascension Island proposal, which is policy exchange, it's not the government, let's underline that, would be a disaster. I think not only extremely expensive, it would also be, to the government's critics, they would call it a Guantanamo Bay, and however you know civilized we behave there, it would become a Guantanamo Bay in the eyes of many people. But it also goes so, I mean, if people applications fail, is it any easier to return refugees from Ascension Island? I mean, not refugees, migrant seekers, failed asylum seekers from Ascension Island than it would be from Britain? No. I mean, the problem is you know, often when people's applications fail, and we saw this with the Liverpool bomber the other month, you know, we're not removing them from the country fast enough. And he was able to stay for years and years, appeal after appeal after appeal. And as we know, his intentions were malign, and he was only caught when he blew himself up.
Ross, thank you ever so much. It's a complex situation, isn't it? I don't know what the answer is myself, but it's clearly something that some government at some point has got to get a handle on. And talking about governments trying to get a handle on crises, it's the protest that has caught the attention of the world. The cavalcades of truckers that have ground Canada to a halt in protest at vaccination mandates and now, well, COVID restrictions at large has sparked copycat movements in France, Australia, the Netherlands and New Zealand. The blockades and occupations led by lorry drivers have also inflamed wider anti-government sentiment, with recent reports that participants were arming themselves to face down police, leading to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau adopting emergency measures only used once before in the country's history that allow him to create no-go zones and freeze the bank accounts of protesters. As the UK, however, is set to segue into its living with COVID strategy next week, our Commonwealth cousins appear to be taking a tragically different route, while much of the world watches on in dismay. Well, let's talk now to Benjamin Ditcher, a spokesperson for the so-called Freedom Convoy protest in Canada. Benjamin, what is the latest there? How is sentiment? And do you think you're going to win this one?
The sentiment is great. Nothing has changed on our end. The government seems to be, or Justin Trudeau and his government seem to do everything they possibly can to escalate the demonstration. I don't know why. This is not what leadership is. It's really quite pathetic at this point. He seems to have played his last card, which is the Emergency Measures Act. On our end, nothing's changed. We're going to continue having our barbecues and our parties and our dancing and people on the stage talking about freedom. And maybe we'll bring back the bouncy castles this weekend for families that are here. And we'll see how things go. But for us, nothing's really changed. They're the ones that are panicking, and it's completely ludicrous, to be entirely honest.
I mean, from our perspective, sitting in the UK, looking over the pond at our Commonwealth cousins in Canada, it all seems very strange because we have had some protests here and they actually have accrued a vast number of people. But we're now about to have our living with COVID policy put into motion next week. And frankly, in Britain, things are almost back to normal. What on earth is going on with Canada? Why is this happening in your country that you've got so many restrictions and mandates that such protests are now causing the Prime Minister to have to use emergency measures?
I don't know. It's completely crazy. Like all of us who do cross-border runs in the trucking industry, we've seen for the past, 6 months, it's like two different worlds. You're in Canada, this dystopian nightmare of paranoia and fear, and everything is locked down and everybody's got a diaper on their face. Sorry, a nappy on their face. But then when we cross in the United States, everything's back to normal. Life goes on as it is. Everybody's behaving as though it was 2019 and before. So it's really quite perplexing. What is the motivation behind it? We do know there are people in government, like Krista Friedland, as by way of an example, is on the board of advisors for the World Economic Forum. Now, does that mean anything? I don't know. Maybe it means nothing. But their behavior is just completely out of touch with what people want. And, you know, they did this massive dump where they, this hack of Give, Send, Go, where somebody was processing 5 million DDoS attacks per hour trying to get data from their server, and they eventually did. And what's amazing is the number of liberals and Democrats who have donated to the Freedom Convoy. It's quite fascinating. So I can't tell you what they're thinking. It makes it's completely ludicrous, and everybody on the left, right, center, progressive, libertarian, whatever, everybody across the board understands the value of freedom and protesting. It just makes no sense to us.
I mean, is there any public sentiment with Trudeau? You'd imagine that there must be a cohort of people out there who back what he's doing. Certainly in the UK, despite there being, you know, a fair amount of opposition to government plans, polling kept continuously suggesting that the public were fairly comfortable with restrictions and happy to go along with government policy, and perhaps for the best, as we're now going to be living with COVID from Monday. Are there people who think that Trudeau's doing the right thing?
It's funny, the whole polling industry has shifted tremendously over the past several years. What is that website, YouGov? I think that has every poll is 72%. So I would be very skeptical of some of the data and the numbers that we get as a result of polling, because most of it is soft polling right now. Justin Trudeau, when he was elected, or the last election, I think it was, he got 19% or 19-something% of the Canadian public voted for him, right? 19% of Canadians casted a vote for him. He's the fringe minority. So yeah, there's always going to be that his party, typically, the Liberal Party, typically always has 25% of the population, but that's not happening right now. They've even slipped beyond their own base. So I don't know what's fueling it. I don't know what they're thinking. I think it's just knee-jerk reaction. They need to show who is in control. We see a lot of this with politicians. I know many of them, and I've been involved in the past. And you get these experts behind the scenes that tell you, you know, you've got to show you're a strong person. You got to be a strong leader. Well, sometimes leadership is just about listening. But they haven't seemed to figure that out.
Benjamin, thank you ever so much. It sounds like you are being contacted by all the members of your convoy to start choreographing your next move. So I'll let you get on with that and keep fighting for freedom. And I love the idea of bouncy castles. It started with hot tubs, didn't it? It sounds like you're having a lot of fun while putting in place some pretty good opposition and defence of freedom. So well done for that. Benjamin Ditcher there, who's spokesperson for that Freedom Convoy in Canada. Ross, finally, what do you make of this one? It's mad, isn't it? When you look at our Commonwealth cousins in New Zealand and Canada, they seem to be living under dictatorships.
It's completely disproportionate, and you know we're virtually back to normal in Britain now. If you're going to try and sustain a zero COVID policy, well, when do you ever open up? It's impossible. You're going to be. I mean, Canada's not in the same camp as New Zealand, but even so, you know, you look at what's going on in New Zealand, sort of locking people down for 24 days because one of the members of their family tested positive. I mean, you know, Jacinda Ardern can never open up New Zealand again. But on the Canadian truckers, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for, you know, their demands against vaccine mandates and so on. I'm very strongly in favour of vaccines. I'm very strongly against vaccine mandates. But I do think it's important to say that I am not in favour of any protest which involves blocking streets and disrupting the lives of ordinary people. And I think it's very important to say that because I oppose it when Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain do it, and I oppose it when the Canadian truckers and anybody else does it. You know, the same rules should apply to anyone. But it's extraordinary how the Liberal left seem to have very flexible views when it comes to campaigning, protesting methods. And when it's Extinction Rebellion, oh, that's just fine. When it's Black Lives Matter, no, bring it on, that's fine. You know, they've got to protest. But when it's sort of anti-vaxxers or Canadian truckers or anti-lockdown protesters, suddenly, you know, it's outrageous, it's fascism to be on the street. And, you know, you've got to be consistent and on your views on what is legitimate protest and what isn't. And, you know, causes you agree with, causes you disagree with, you should have the same view on what is the legitimate act of protest.
Do you think, in a way, in a strange way, that this could work out well for Britain? Because when we look at our you know, when it comes to other countries, we look at countries like New Zealand and Canada as much like us because they're Anglophone Commonwealth countries. And actually seeing what comes from electing leaders on the outside might look very liberal and shiny and progressive. Well, you may not always get what you vote for.
Yes, I mean, I'm not exactly sure where the term liberal applies to in Justin Trudeau's case. I mean, there's sort of emergency legislation where I understand they can just sort of block the bank accounts of anyone who's sort of connected with the protests. And I mean, you know, it's an outrageous way to behave. And, you know, if we were behaving like that towards Extinction Rebellion, you can just imagine what the left would say.
We weren't even allowed to unglue whatever they were called, Insulation for Us, or I can't remember them now. Insulate Britain, that's it. Yeah, no, it's a staggering set of events, isn't it? Ross, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having your insights. I always adore reading your work and your columns. If you aren't familiar with Ross Clarke, look out for him because he writes prolifically and he's always got great points to make. That's about it for now. Join me again tomorrow, same time, same place. You should know it by now, 2 o'clock on GB News for more We Need to Talk About. We'll be covering again the 4 big top stories of the day. Thank you, of course, to my guest, Ross Clarke. But next is Darren McCaffrey. However, before that, let's have a look at the weather. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. 2 named storms in the next 48 hours are likely to bring disruption to many and dangerous wind speeds to some. Storm Dudley later today and then Storm Eunice on Friday. The rain ahead of Dudley already pushing in across much of the UK. Bands of heavy and persistent rain pushing eastwards across northern and western England, Wales, and for a time Scotland and Northern Ireland. That falling as hill snow for the north of Scotland, but with southwesterly winds picking up strength elsewhere, it's actually a very mild day for the vast majority, 15, 16 Celsius possible in the south. Then the spells of rain move through, but the wind really picks up through the evening. 70 and in some places 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The worst hit areas, Central Belt, southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland and northern England. Risk of disruption from those wind speeds and risk of some damaging wind speeds in some places. It's windy everywhere through the night and there'll be blustery showers, longer spells of rain and hill snow for northern Scotland. And it's going to be cold in the north, but milder further south as we start off the day tomorrow. A bright start, and although it's a windy day again tomorrow, the winds will be coming down following the overnight strengths. And for many, it's a day of sunny spells and blustery showers. Again, hill snow for Scotland. Showers hit and miss elsewhere, with some brighter interludes in between. 11 Celsius in the south for the likes of Southampton and Plymouth. I think 5 to 8 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Into Thursday evening then, clear at first. The winds drop away at first, but the next spell of rain starts to move into southwest England, south and west Wales by the evening. And this is Storm Eunice very quickly rushing across the UK, and it's during Friday morning that it's likely to bring damaging and even dangerous wind speeds of 80 to 90 mile per hour for West Wales, South Wales, Bristol Channel coast and southwest coast. And on the northern flank of that low, the likelihood of disruptive snowfall for parts of northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
I'm Darren McCaffrey and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join